Exactly the way Mama told you not to eat. Mom said, remember, eat a little bit of everything.
Right.
Actually, eat your protein first, then your veggies, and then your carbs.
Well, there's a pearl. Sue, if I can get a pearl, one piece of information from a podcast or a lecture or something, that's worthwhile. Welcome to the Dr. Gill Show. This is where we talk about medical matters that matter to you. My return guest today is Dr. Sue Overkamp. Welcome back to the show, Sue.
Gil, thanks for having me. It's such a treat.
As my viewers might remember, Sue is a board-certified family practice physician. She's board-certified in osteopathic manipulation, hands-on stuff, and she's also certified in acupuncture. And a few episodes ago, I had you on, and we were going to be talking, we spoke about acupuncture. And you mentioned, there happen to be 3 more Chinese modalities in the modalities or topics in the world of Chinese medicine and healing that are even more powerful than acupuncture. So I was fascinated. I said, well, there's 3 episodes right there. And you've very generously offered to come back and talk about these 3 topics. The first most powerful modality is perhaps Qigong, the discipline of working with life energy. And the second one that we're going to talk about today are concepts that underlie nutrition in Chinese healing, wellness, medicine, etc. Now, nutrition is near and dear to my heart. I've been in the nutrition space, as it were, for well over 20 years now here in the United States. What got me interested in nutrition was I was slender and fit almost my whole life, and then I ballooned up and became very obese. And in my recovery and from obesity, I learned a lot about nutrition and the science behind it, and the misperceptions and the dogma that's essentially behind that has been behind Western nutrition for many years, that has been wrong, to use a blunt term, wrong. And something else I've learned is that we're all different. We all have different genetics, different backgrounds, we're different ages. We have, we're all so different that the thought that one size fits all or there's one perfect diet for every person, I think has got to be dispelled. But the concepts around nutrition, in all cultures, obviously go back thousands and thousands of years. Something that's fascinating to me is the idea of the poisonous mushrooms. I mean, somebody must have eaten a particular mushroom and died, and someone was smart enough in whatever language, ooh, that mushroom bad, right?
Don't
and somebody recorded it, right?
Right.
And over thousands of years, we've learned which ones you can eat, which ones you can't. There's this ancient knowledge and wisdom, and China and Asia is no different from any place else. So with that long introduction, I would love to hear what you know about nutrition and foods and the Chinese concepts of health and well-being. And with that, I'll just let you run with it. So talk to me about Chinese nutrition.
Well, I wonder if I should lead off by ruining everybody's summer culinary dream.
Go ahead.
Well, maybe I won't. We'll get to that in a minute. So Chinese nutrition has to do with balancing. Everything about Asian medicine has to do with balancing. So if something's out of balance, then we want to help the body, mind, spirit to return to homeostasis or balance. You could think of homeostasis is not a static balance where you have equal weights on each side, but it's a moving, shifting, maintenance of balance.
Yeah, right.
Think of
Nothing
it more as
static,
3D. Yeah.
A 3D balance.
3D
Love it.
balance. So Chinese nutrition also has to do with balance, just like Qigong and acupuncture and herbal medicine and many other non-Chinese modalities. I mean, in Western medicine, we're trying to help our patients achieve balance as well.
Yeah, I guess we are.
Well, in your work, you do, because fertility is a normal, natural human function.
Right.
When a couple isn't balanced, you help them find a balance that works for them so that they can have a child.
I love it. Sure, yes. I guess that's what I've been doing without calling it such.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in nutrition, I think a concept that's the most helpful is to understand cooling and warming.
Okay, another yin and yang kind of thing.
Exactly. So some foods are cold. Some foods are hot. Many foods are moderate, and many foods are cool, and many are warm. So there's the spectrum of hot, warm, moderate, cool, cold.
Okay.
And if we need to warm somebody up, as my acupuncture teacher used to say, yang it up.
Yang it up.
If you want to yang it up, you're going to use warming foods. That doesn't mean that everything in your bowl of beautiful Asian cookery is all warming, but it's more warming than cooling. So, for instance, xiaobaicai, little Chinese cabbages, are a little bit cooling. And I put them in my chicken broth, and maybe I have a little hot pepper there if I need some warming. And chicken is moderate to warm, so it's not cooling. Surprisingly, pork is cold. The way you can think about it from a Western scientific standpoint is if you took this food and you burned it in the lab, would it have an alkaline ash or an acid ash?
Oh, a lot has been made of that over the years.
Not that it's the only way to think about this. The main thing is to think about balance, but that's how to kind of understand whether the foods are cold or hot, cool or warm, or just kind of moderate. So I was going to ruin everybody's summer earlier, so I'm going to do it now. And the worst food possibly, according to this way of thinking, is ice cream. It's cold, it's dairy, and it's so hard on the spleen. It's sweet. It's like a lot of sugar.
Right.
These are things that are really hard on the spleen chi, okay? I don't mean the spleen, the organ. I mean the spleen chi.
Spleen chi.
So what I'll say to all you ice cream lovers out there is yang it up.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to have some ice cream, why don't you go home and have maybe a little ginger tea?
Now, is ice cream more yin then?
Ice cream is super, super, super yin.
Super yin.
Really yin.
Okay, so you can kind of balance it a little bit that way.
With warmer things, yeah.
Now, I assume there's maintenance dietary practices, and then there's maybe some changes that you make to deal with imbalance or disease or whatnot. So maybe we can start out with just maintenance. What would a healthy diet in China look like? Why don't we start there?
Well, let's start with McDonald's. Chinese are starting to have more trouble with obesity because they're eating fast
diabetes.
food.
It's all skyrocketing now.
So what I mean to say is that I think our audience probably has a pretty good appreciation of some basic good ways to eat. Clean eating, so not additives. Try to eat stuff that hasn't been produced with maybe a lot of fertilizer or antibiotics. So that kind of eating is exactly in line with Chinese healthy eating. The tendency to eat less of, say, a lot of heavy carb and eating a variety of fruits and vegetables, eating meat so for some people, eating meat is not a good choice for a variety of reasons. What the Chinese doctor says is if that person becomes ill and their qi level is low, meat will help that to build. Not that we would force feed that to anyone who had an ethical exception to eating meat, but that meat is a food that is a strong food that helps people to heal. Another food that isn't meat that does a similar thing is goji berries. So goji berries help support the immune system. They're little wolfberries, those little red. I didn't bring any, but...
I wish I could say I knew what goji berries are. I'm sure I've seen them before.
Yeah, they're a beautiful... So a cranberry is a blue red. A goji berry is also an intense red. You get them dry-ish. So cranberries you can get dried, but you can also get fresh.
Right.
But a goji berry is more toward a yellow red than a blue red. And they are about that size. So about, a half to 3/4 of an inch long.
And are these available in the United States?
They absolutely are. They're actually easy to get. And one of the things that Chinese doctors will recommend sometimes is to take goji berries and soak them in rice wine and give that to a person who's recovering from surgery. It speeds up their healing.
Goji berries and rice wine. I love it. So let me summarize this so far. Chinese culture appreciates quality foods that aren't processed with minimal additives. Okay, so that sounds pretty parallel with modern nutritional thinking. We'll talk more about meat in a bit. Now, is there much emphasis put on the environment in which you eat? Is that important, Sue?
The environment in which you take your meal, or the environment in which the foodstuffs are produced?
All right, well, let's look at both. All right, how about the environment where it's being produced? I know in China there's a lot of pollution.
There's a lot of trouble.
A lot of trouble due to
because there's not regulation.
Right.
So, yeah, there's the trouble with food. In fact, when I prescribe Chinese herbs for people, I don't prescribe herbs from the mainland. I prescribe Taiwanese herbs because they do a much better job of trying to not pollute their soil and
yeah, I heard that almost every square inch of Chinese soil is potentially contaminated.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a whole other topic I wasn't even prepared to talk about.
You do the best. You just do the best you can, right?
Right. And I know you can get some herbs from India and other parts of Asia.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you can.
I'm jumping ahead to herbs here. Herbs is going to be another, Sue, if I can get you for another podcast on herbs, that would be fantastic. I know there's American ginseng, which is a little different from Chinese ginseng, but maybe close enough if it's coming out of a clean environment. So
a clean environment is important whether you're eating according to Chinese ideas or anybody's ideas. You want the environment to be good so that the plants and animals that you eat are healthy.
Okay, so that's there's nothing off base about that. We can all agree on that.
That's familiar, yeah. That's
familiar, yeah. So how about the environment in which you eat? And I love the French. I've spent a lot of time in France, and I love French food. And I know that, I remember when I was a kid and I traveled there, they were horrified to see us eating or drinking food in the car. I remember we were driving through southern France. They go, the French, they pull over, they open the trunk, they pull out the table, the red and white checkered tablecloth, the whole deal.
Yes.
You sit, you take time, and you eat in a relaxed manner.
Yes.
Is that also important in China?
It's okay to speak at the meal in China, but yes, there's a premium placed on we're going to sit together and eat together.
Okay.
I was talking with my sister about this morning. She said, we never questioned. Mom said breakfast is ready. We sat down and ate. lunch is ready, we sat down. Dinner is ready, we sat down.
There was a time.
Our culture has shifted away from that some. And, when there are parents each have a job and they have several children, it can be difficult to do this kind of thing. So this isn't to blame anybody,
right,
but just the ideal might be to, when having a family meal, to not have the TV, but to visit with each other, or just to sit and quietly eat. There was a man who I think was a pretty brilliant guy. His name was Peter D'Adamo, and he was a naturopathic doctor. And before we mapped the human genome, he wrote a book called Eat Right for Your Type. So he was using blood type.
Yes, I remember that
lectins
book,
to describe what foods might work best for people of a certain blood type. And it was pretty successful for me. So I'm greatly predating the mapping of the genome. And I bring that up because now that we've mapped the genome, I think that in time we're going to be able to very specifically do nutrition for people according to their genotype and their phenotype.
Yeah.
Which is very powerful stuff. And I'm pretty excited about people doing that. So sitting down at the table and enjoying a peaceful atmosphere, not discussing contentious subjects.
You avoid politics at dinner.
And Peter D'Adamo took it a step further. And he was all about family members communicating, but he said at dinner, we're just going to eat. And they would eat quietly together. They didn't really talk. So I think that there's a range of things that are helpful. What we want to do is we want to have that parasympathetic rest and digest thing going on.
The vibe. Yeah.
And so the familiarity is a great way to induce rest and digest. So we have these are our pho bowls or our soup bowls, and these are our spoons, and these are our chopsticks. And, it's the second daughter's turn to serve today, and it's the older son's chance to do it tomorrow, kind of thing. That it's an activity like it would be if we were going to go to the zoo together or the art museum or something like that. It's cherished time.
Yeah, it certainly is for me. So that's something that clearly goes across cultures and across continents. And when a lot of people agree on something, frequently it's right.
To be fair, for people who don't have the means, it can be really difficult to have some of the things that I've just spoken about. But it's still my impression that in Chinese culture, food and feeding are super, super important. This is a little bit off Chinese, but I have a doctor friend who is from India, and there's actually a ceremony for each of her children, the first feeding of food. Not the breast milk, but the first feeding of food is an actual ritual for the child. So this sense of cherishing around food is a pretty important aspect.
And certainly many of us grew up with prayer and at the time of a meal.
Yes. And my Tai Chi Qigong teacher, Zhang Shixin, lived in San Francisco for many years. And many of my fellow students and teachers were invited to the Zhang household for baozi, Chinese dumplings. And Mrs. Zhang would just make platters and platters and platters. And if they didn't eat, she would just insist that they eat. So there's this whole Jewish mama or Italian mama thing too of eat.
Oh, you got me hungry. I can feel my parada is cooking out right now. Chinese dumplings. I know. Yeah, my Tai Chi teacher when I was young, his wife would make them, and she remembered teaching us how to fold them over, and there was the easy way, but then she would do the over the top. It was do. She could just do it like a machine.
A way to crimp the dumpling shut so that when you cook it, interstate in there.
Oh, I'm getting hungry. And the soy sauce, the special soy sauce. Oh, my goodness. Those are old memories. So is routine important for Chinese food and thought? Is the same time of having, or first of all, do they agree that maybe 3 meals is a good idea during the day? For somehow we've been brainwashed to think breakfast, lunch, and dinner are just part of eating here in the West. Is that true from a Chinese perspective?
Well, I've been in China 2 different times, and both times we always had breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so they do it too.
So that's been my experience. And then how to cook and prepare food, I mean, that's all an important art and science as well.
Should we get into that now?
Well, I wish I knew more about it. I was treated as an honored guest, which I'm really grateful for. So I was kind of not allowed in the kitchen. And to the extent that the physician and his wife, who were our hosts in Guangzhou, asked her brother to come from the north of China, where he lives in Mongolia, all the way to Guangzhou, which is South China.
That's a long way.
To cook our meals.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. I when I found that out, it was, oh, my gosh, very startling and humbling. That they would do this. But they regarded us as honored guests because their daughter married a dear, dear friend of ours, and an American and a Chinese. And so they wanted to have 2 weddings, one in the States and one in China. And so my husband and I helped them organize and have their American wedding. The parents couldn't come because they had just been to their daughter's graduation not long before. So they had their American wedding. Well, we didn't know that when we offered to do that we were going to be adopted into this Chinese family. So we were thought of as another set of parents for Lily. And so they invited us to come to China for the Chinese wedding, which we did. And that's where we were wined and dined. And so food is a great, just as it is for us really, a great way to entertain people, to show your regard for them, and to enjoy their company. So I wish I could tell you more about Chinese cooking. I only know a little bit, and I do enjoy cooking what I know.
Now, I read something about the size of the meals. Mm-hmm. I read an interesting comment that one piece of advice, it sounds like the breakfast could be large. Is it to eat breakfast like a king and then eat lunch like an emperor? I don't know how much a king, if an emperor is bigger than a king, but then eat dinner like a beggar.
Right. Yes.
Would you expand on that? What is meant by that, other than just the size of the meals, which is pretty self-explanatory?
Well, just going by the hours. So the acupuncture meridians each have a 2-hour slot during the day. So the 12 meridians each have a 2-hour slot.
Oh, my goodness.
And the stomach time is at breakfast time. And the small intestine time is closer to lunchtime. So you can see that the activity, and then the colon time is before the breakfast time.
Okay.
Just before breakfast. So it's considered healthy to evacuate your bowels and then have breakfast. And then,
so maybe this is too much information, right? I generally poop in the morning, early in the morning when I get. So that's normal.
That's the right time.
That's the right time. Excellent. All right. Too much information.
And if you don't poop at the right time, well, then don't get too worried about it if you're otherwise healthy.
All right.
But that's why the timing of meals, it really does go with the physiology. So the stomach gets from 7 to 9 a.m., gets the more chi attention at that time of day.
Okay.
And then small intestine is later closer to lunchtime, so that you're eating a meal when the small intestine can really start now to break that food down and help you absorb the nutrients.
Yeah, because the small intestine, folks, is where the nutrients are absorbed. That's where things get in your body for the most part, in the small intestine. So when it says lunch like an emperor. Is an emperor bigger than a king, or they're both? Or they're saying that breakfast and lunch should be your two big meals?
Yeah, a king is smaller than an emperor.
Than an emperor. Okay, emperor is okay.
Yeah.
So biggest meal of the day might be lunch.
In the midday.
In the midday.
And a lot of the functional medicine doctors who trained me said the same thing, that your big meal in the middle of the day and not at the end of the day. It's too much strain on the body. The liver has to have its most active time between 1 and 3 a.m. So you want everything digested. You don't want a lot of energy for digestion per se, so that the liver can do the job that it needs to do. Not that it has no role in digestion, don't get me wrong, but it does so many other things that we want the liver to be free and clear to do what it does while we sleep. So the digestive stuff is earlier in the day.
Okay.
And then cell nutrition, so we're actually we're assimilating nutrients into cells. That happens later. The body can only do so many big jobs at once. So you don't want to get a huge meal on and then go run a marathon. Right? You want to do your loading the day before, eat light and hydrate, and go run, and then let everything settle back down before you start really eating a lot. So that wisdom of, if you've put the body into an extreme position like running a marathon, then when you're going to restart things like digestion, start low, go slow. Just that old wisdom of don't try to bombard the body. Help it.
I wonder, I don't know if it's an old wives' tale or something that that you get fat if you eat, a big meal at night and then you sleep on it. Maybe there's something to that.
There could be. I can't say. I don't know. But I know that for myself, if I can eat my biggest meal in the middle of the day, I feel better.
You feel better?
Sometimes I'm at work, so that doesn't work for me. I try to take something that I had for dinner the night before, but that doesn't always work out.
Right.
And I do eat dinner for breakfast an awful lot because that's the way I need to eat because of my allergies and other stuff that I have. And then the other thing about nutrition is just that, so last winter I was having trouble with some respiratory illnesses, and my Chinese doctor said, make your chicken broth and grate daikon into it. So put daikon.
Radish, a hot radish.
A hot radish. It's white. White is the color of lung. A lot of times the color of the food is a sign of which meridian it's going to help. Like you eat red things for the heart. Like you eat strawberries for the heart, and you eat seafood can be for the heart. And so, there's that notion of what we called in the West an herbal signature, where the shape of the plant, the color of the plant, talks about the function of the plant when it's used as food.
Wonderful.
So there's all that too. Food as medicine. We want our food to be our medicine. And when we're not well enough that we can use only our food, then maybe we have to move on to other stuff. But that's why nutrition is number 2, because we want food to be our medicine and our medicine to be our food.
Love it. I love it. Now, there's another concept that always made sense to me, is that you shouldn't drink much water or much fluid while you're eating. I know some people say, oh, drink all this water while you're eating, but doesn't that dilute your stomach acid and whatnot? What are your thoughts on not drinking very much fluid with a meal?
If a person has a physical situation in which they can't eat their food without drinking fluid, for instance, say somebody with an esophagus problem or something like that, you would want them to be drinking because that's going to help move the food into their stomach.
All right.
But a normal, healthy person, what we want for them is to eat their food on an empty stomach. And I'm not sure this is Chinese, but I'll give this out anyway.
Please.
The stomach is full of hydrochloric acid when it's empty and nothing's been in there for a while. The stomach secretes hydrochloric acid to do two very important things. One is to kill any bacteria that's on the food.
Yeah, it sterilizes your food on the way in.
Right, because
very important.
Can't
in the old
stand
days.
the hydrochloric acid.
Right.
And then the second thing is to begin, but not complete, but to begin the digestion of protein. It helps so that once the protein is bathed in hydrochloric acid, it goes into the small bowel. It gets an alkaline bath. And now we can really start breaking those proteins down into amino acids and absorbing them, and then they can be assimilated. So what you want to do when you eat is don't have a lot of fluid before you eat or even while you eat. Have your food, have your proteinaceous foods first.
Well, that makes sense if you need acid to break them down.
It helps getting it started. So proteinaceous foods first. Next are neutral foods, and veggies are great for this. So if you want to eat anything acid with your meal, like I just randomly talked about cranberries earlier.
Right.
So let's say you're going to have a piece of chicken with a cranberry sauce. Eat the cranberries with the meat. Meat loves acid. Carbs love alkaline. Don't put sugar with carbs. Sugar is acid. It will cause you to ferment the carb, and now you'll have bloating and discomfort and stuff like that. So you want to eat the proteins and anything acid like fruit first, then the neutral vegetables, anything. If it's raw like salad or if it's a cooked veggie, great. And then anything that's carb, like let's say you're going to have a couple little red potatoes or you're going to have a sweet potato or something, that's last. Because now the protein and the veggies have swept the hydrochloric acid out of the stomach, and it's fairly denuded of hydrochloric acid at this point. And then the carbs can go straight through and then into the small bowel where they get their bicarb bath, because carbs need alkaline to be digested. So proteins, then veggies, then carbs.
Then carbs.
Exactly the way Mama told you not to eat. Mom said, remember, eat a little bit of everything. Right. Actually, eat your protein first, then your veggies, and then your carbs.
Well, there's a pearl. Sue, if I can get a pearl, one piece of information from a podcast or a lecture or something, that's worthwhile.
I can't guarantee that that's Chinese, but...
Well, it seems to me that kind of comes out from the things that I've been reading. Now, how about seasonal eating?
Oh,
a lot's been made of this, different cultures. And once again, I keep bringing up French food. I wasn't planning on this, but the cow's milk is different in the summer from the fall, from the winter, and then the different fat contents and tastes. I know there are different, I can't tell you which ones, but I know there's certain recipes you make with summer milk or with winter milk or winter cream or all that kind of stuff. I know some people make a big deal about getting, summer foods and fruits from the southern hemisphere. You can take these fruits from Chile and fly them up here in the middle of winter. You can have an orange,
right?
Or a strawberry or something. Are there thoughts in Chinese medicine about eating foods in season? For example, salads and stuff during the summer and root vegetables in the winter. Can you expound on that if that's true?
Sure. Cooling foods in the summer. And I'm going to jump away from China again and talk about Mediterranean food, because in the Mediterranean countries, there's not normally a lot of cold. There can be some, but not not in Northern Europe.
Right.
So why do they use all those spicy things like harissa spices and stuff like that? It's the same reason why people drink coffee in Zimbabwe, which is very hot. Makes you perspire, and that cools you. So it's spicy hot, what we call hot. It helps you perspire, and that helps you cool off. Think of what it is to be clever about living in a very hot environment where you don't have air conditioning.
Yes.
How are you going to thrive there? Well, through perspiring. It's going to help cool you off, and of course, you're going to rest at the hottest part of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in Greece as a teenager, dinner was served at 10 p.m.
When it was dark and cool. Yep.
In Athens, you did not eat your dinner in the hot of the day because it was too hot.
Right.
So you waited until much later. I know that contradicts something I said earlier, but honestly, I do eat heavier meals in the middle of the day in the wintertime. And in the summer, I just eat lighter because it's hot.
It's hot.
Yeah. So spicy foods can help you perspire and cool you off. Milk is not a feature of Chinese cuisine that I know of.
Right. Isn't there a lot of lactose intolerance?
Yeah, I'll take that back. In some Cantonese cooking, there is sometimes some milk products, but in general, in China, not a lot of milk because of lactose intolerance. And apparently, all human adults are lactose intolerant. We stop making the enzyme to digest lactose into constituent sugars. Once we are about weaning age, we eventually stop making lactase.
Okay.
But maybe we're making a little bit of lactase so we can eat some milk products. Or maybe based on our genetics, we just don't make lactase. Then we really cannot eat milk with its lactose and galactose. So there's not a lot of milk in Chinese. And you asked me about milk.
Sure.
Seasonal eating for Chinese wouldn't normally include milk. But I will say this. People who are herding people and who they say that the type B blood comes from herding people.
Okay.
People who herd animals like for thousands of years, they tend to be more lactose tolerant. So they'll take the mare's milk and just, if they're nomadic people, they'll just put the mare's milk into a leather pouch and they'll just ride all day. And then tomorrow morning when they get up, it's yogurt.
Right.
And so fermented food, or what's the right word for this, but the not processed foods. Is yogurt fermented? It's not really.
Yeah, I think so. It's
no
special
alcohol
lactose.
is produced, but it is processed by bacteria. The lactose is processed by
the
bacteria.
lactobacilli. Yeah,
So
the kefirs, the yogurts.
I bet every adult watching this knows whether or not, or to what degree, they can tolerate milk products. We mostly learn by
experience. So eating seasonally seems to make sense, and that's certainly embraced in Chinese culture. I'm told.
Yes, of course, China is huge. So
oh yeah, my goodness.
China encompasses, I think, is it 5 or 7 time zones?
It's pretty big.
Now everybody's on Beijing time.
Yes, isn't it?
But that's how big of a country it is. So if you live in Mongolia, it's cold in the wintertime. It's never cold in Guangzhou. Never. Or Canton, people might know it by that name. So that's far southeastern China. It's a seafood culture because they're right there on the ocean. A lot of the cuisine is around seafood. And then if you're in Beijing, Beijing is cold in the winter and hot in the summer, kind of like our area of the country.
Now, another concept I want you to talk about, because this may have to do more with meridians and whatnot, but is there some avoidance of cold foods or raw foods that you're aware of? I know there's raw vegans who eat everything. I met a raw vegan, and everything was uncooked. And he was a guy. It was a guy. And he was very skinny. And my first thought is, you're not absorbing anything because it's all raw, it's all uncooked. Yeah, you're slender because there's nothing getting in your blood. But is there anything in Chinese nutrition that has any thoughts on raw foods or uncooked foods?
Absolutely. I had a darling patient. First time I ever saw her, she was barely able to walk in the door, looked fit. So she didn't have any like decreased muscle mass or anything. And so I brought her in, sat her down, and I said, tell me about how you eat. And she said, well, I've basically been doing a lot of celery juice. Now, this is in January. Celery is super cooling. It's a summer thing. It's a great thing for summer because it's loaded with minerals, and we're sweating out all these minerals all the time.
Right.
And it's very cooling. So if you're going to do celery juice fasting, please, first of all, make sure that that's suitable for your constitution, shall we say, and your level of health, and also to the season. So I just said, okay, so I think we might have an easy fix to this. And she looked so relieved because she had become so lethargic, and she had like 5 children. And she was almost unable to get out of bed because she was just exhausted.
Running on empty.
And she said, I'm doing this juice fasting, and I was sure it was going to make me feel better. And I said, here's why it doesn't make you feel better at this time of year. And she started understanding some and eating more warming foods and feeling better, and we got her feeling better in a couple of weeks. So yes, there is definitely something to the seasonal thing and what foods to eat when. That's bigger than a podcast can do for an individual person, though.
Yeah,
so see your doctor.
Right. And I did start out this conversation saying that one size does not fit all. We're all different.
Right.
In so many ways. And what may be good for one person's not for another.
Right. So on that patient, I did pulse diagnosis, and I mean, she had G low in every single pulse.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm so glad she got here and didn't have to wind up.
Did you cook her a steak or what did you do?
Yeah, I was tempted.
Give her some sardines or something.
Something warming, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we did. We talked about warming foods, and she went home and started to get better. Stopped the celery juice.
Apparently sardines with the bones in is just a superfood.
They are a very nice food, and they're great for people my age because you're getting the protein and the calcium.
Yeah, and the minerals, yeah.
So dietary calcium is a little hard to come by, and it's a little hard to assimilate sometimes. A lot of people think of spinach as a food with a lot of good minerals. It does have good minerals, but it's also high in phytic acid, which blocks the absorption of minerals.
Yeah.
So go to the broccoli family and bone-in fishes that are canned.
Yeah.
That's been helpful for me.
I think bone-in canned in tomato sauce. That's acidic. Apparently has pre-digested the bones.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. My wife, Regina, she is so inquisitive, and she's such an expert in finding information. She had a challenge for somebody. How could they match, daily recommended requirements for all the vitamins and minerals and whatnot in a certain number of calories or whatnot? And because we kept running, she and I were both involved in the nutrition community about 20 years ago. And we were very frustrated by the government food recommendations.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you match and if you believe in calories, and calories are kind of a representation of how much food you're eating. They're not a precise thing by any means in the human body. They aren't a calorimeter, not in the human body. But it turns out you couldn't get the nutrients the government wanted you to get here without getting too many calories over here, and it was a mismatch. Anyway, she found out a way that you could do it.
Cool.
And she found there was 2 foods you could do it with: bone-in sardines and cabbage.
Interesting.
And it turns out in Poland during the war, they lived on
that's what people had.
They had cabbage and then some canned fish or something, and you can live maybe forever on canned fish and cabbage.
Wow. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's just a great mix of everything. That's a freebie for people out there. There's a lot of cabbage in Chinese food anyway.
Oh, yes. The cabbage family is huge in Chinese food.
It's not just bok choy.
And it's not just bok choy. It's not just cabbage. It's not just broccoli or cauliflower. They have these lovely little baby bok choys that are melt in your mouth little veggies. So.
I'm getting so hungry, Sue. This sounds great.
I have to cook.
I want some baby bok choys in pork fat. Oh, man, that sounds great. Now, I think the Chinese also know the evils of sugar and alcohol.
They do. And like people everywhere, they also have some sugar and some alcohol.
And they smoke too. Yeah. Sure,
the smoking is a big thing. Yeah.
A lot of smoking in China. But at least there's an appreciation that too much sugar, too much alcohol, not good. I mean, that's another thing that I think everyone agrees on.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a standard American household, you would usually have pretty substantial carbs at most meals. That's not necessarily the case in China.
Yeah, people think that the Chinese live on rice.
Yeah.
Not true.
Only if that's all they can afford.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's poverty.
And that's not to say that rice isn't a perfectly good food for anyone.
Sure.
But people who live on rice often have to do that because they don't have other sources of food. They might have a few vegetables or something like that.
In there.
So you do what you can with what you got.
Yes, now that's another universal issue, right? Now, one thing that I read about is that in Chinese nutrition, doesn't sound like they are big fans of fasting. Right. And I'm going to assume this because obesity has not traditionally been a problem in most of the world. Just getting enough food has always been the human challenge. Any thoughts on fasting and Chinese nutrition?
Let's talk about context. So,
excellent. I love context.
If a person eats complex carbs like, brown rice or like a whole grain, and they burn off the calories from eating that grain, great, they're in a health state, right?
Okay.
If a person eats a lot of refined carbs and doesn't burn them off, eventually they won't be in a healthy state because we have thrifty genes.
Yes, we do.
And our genes are going to hold on to fat that we manufacture out of carbs against a rainy day, a day when we don't have enough to eat, because all of our ancestors, almost no matter who they were, had go through times of feasting and fasting.
Yes.
And so fasting was the wintertime, especially toward the end. The greatest wildlife die-off is in February.
Right.
And so we, too, went through that sort of an issue. And then the feasting times are the harvest times.
Yeah.
So we would eat at feasting times. And then we went into fast time, not necessarily by choice. We might only be able to snare a rabbit, or depending on where, what climate we lived in.
Right.
So my genes are Northern European almost exclusively.
Sure.
So I have to not eat so much, because if I just eat what I feel like eating, I gain weight.
Yeah.
And with my lifestyle, it's pretty hard for me to exercise enough to burn it all off that day. Right. Now, there are people who do. And if you think about people in a pre-industrial culture working in the fields, they are absolutely working off what they ate.
Sure. Just trying to keep up.
So that's kind of how I see the whole fasting issue. You don't need to fast if you are perspiring, so you're kind of detoxing that way, and you're not overeating your ability to exercise. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
So I think that's where the Chinese not being in favor of fasting probably came from.
Mm-hmm.
And fasting is a huge topic, Gil.
Yeah.
It is such a huge topic.
Yeah.
And I do fast sometimes, and I find it's less effective for me now than it was when I was younger. So
interesting.
I have to focus more on moving and eating right than I ever did. I mean, I had to focus on it then too for a variety of reasons, but now I have to focus on that even harder, because fasting won't do it for me. Not as well. It'll do it a little bit.
Yeah. So it sounds to me, Sue, that Chinese concepts of nutrition really are not off base or much different from wisdom in other cultures around the world.
I think that's right, Gil. It's a wonderful set of cuisines. There are so many different facets to China, so many different cuisines. There's the cuisine of the north. There's the cuisine of seafood in the south that we talked about. In southwest China, that's a more Arabic type language and cuisine. So there's a great multiplicity of cuisines in China. And so I struggled to talk about it because there are so many different kinds and things I've never even tried. And so we probably need somebody who's much more of an expert to make sense out of it. I understand that a woman wrote a cookbook in 2023 that's been very successful about the different types of cuisines in China. So if I knew the title of that, I would recommend it to everybody. But
I'm sure you could Google it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Sue, this is, in addition to making me very hungry, and I am fasting at the moment, thank you for another really insightful discussion. And we're going to do another podcast someday.
Great.
On herbs. Will you come back and talk to us about Chinese herbs and herbology?
Gil, it's always a blast being here. I would love to do that.
Thank you very much, Sue, for another great interview.
Thank you, Gil.